And relational depth is actually a theory that was developed by Mick Cooper and Dave Mearns in collaboration, trying to get a sense of how we connect with each other in a meaningful way. That's probably the best way of describing it. And I think what's really, really interesting with relational depth is that it doesn't just apply to therapy. Let me give you an example. I went out on my constitutional walk in my hometown just to get a little bit of air in my lungs and get a bit fitter. And I bumped into my neighbour, who is a Methodist minister. And we had a wonderful interaction, just talking about, existence and life. And at that moment, we were connected. And sometimes, there's a Gestalt word for it. It's called confluence, where you're not quite sure where you begin and the other person ends. And it was really meaningful. And it was almost like there was only the two of us in the world for that short space of time. That's my perception. His perception may be different, I have to say. And that is relational depth. It's moments of deep relating. And it's not modality specific. We talk about it in person-centered therapy, but actually it's in any interaction we have. And it's at that point where we're really seeing the other person and gaining a visceral sense of who they are, Ken.
I like that. That's a lovely description of it. And I think relational depth is difficult to describe. When you've experienced it, you'll know it. Yes. And it's that vanishing. You vanish. You're no longer consciously being competent within the relationship. You're not concentrating on the theory you're using or the skill that you were using. You are just integrated with that client and then with you at real relational depth. It's almost a magical connection. And you can experience, as you say, Rory, relational depth or the same kind of feeling in other areas of your life. You might be focused on something, be super focused, and then look up and go, wow, where's the last hour go? You're connecting at a very, very deep level. You kind of lose yourself in what you are doing. So that, I guess, gives us an overview of relational depth. And I think a misunderstanding about relational depth is that it's a place that we aim to get to, so that you would start the counseling session, and then as the trust develops within the relationship, so you would move towards this magical place called relational depth. You're now there. You've kind of gone through the barrier and you're now in the relational depth. And that is where the rest of the session will take place, and the rest of the sessions with that client. But that's not how it is. Relational depth are moments where, and you will go in and out of that relational depth. It's not somewhere you're aiming to be and to take the therapy relationship. It just occurs when you and the client are kind of melding together, as you say, when you don't realize when you end and they start, Rory.
Absolutely. And I think that Mick Cooper in his blog sums it up beautifully. And one of the questions is, what is relational depth? And he says it's a state of profound contact and engagement between people. Our good friend Mick Cooper, of course, has done a lot of lectures for us. And I think that sums it up absolutely, exquisitely, Ken. And you're right, it doesn't happen all the time, but it kind of chimes. I used to say to my students, you'll feel it chime. Yeah. You'll feel a visceral a body sensation when you hit relational depth. And they used to come back and he said, we didn't know what you were talking about in the classroom until we've experienced it. And when we experienced it, it's like, whoa, it's almost like clang, like a bell clang, and you just feel yourself connected and ebbing and flowing within the relationship. It's a wonderful thing. And I think a lot of people experience that who are not therapists, to be honest, Ken. I think that you can have that in any walk of life, providing you put the person in front of you really at the center of your attention and the center of your universe, and that you're really deeply listening to them, that you tune into that person.
Yeah, there's no set of tactics for creating relational depth. Or maybe there is. That's an interesting one. Maybe there is. But the tactics are based in the forming of the relationship and the 100% being there with the person, as opposed to if I use a specific kind of theory and say skills in a certain way, that's going to lead to relation depth. It's more about who we are within the relationship. So it's interesting that for relational depth with another human, which is what we're looking for at that deeper level in counseling, we look to ourselves, on our own, and how we can develop and put our stuff aside, because it's about really being there with that person. It's about the active listening. And if you go back over some of the foundation podcasts that we've done, we speak a lot about this, about who are you within the relationship? How do you form that relationship? Active listening within that relationship. And all of those kind of meld together. They create the trusting environment where that relational depth will occur. And you mentioned Professor Mick Cooper, who does so much work on relational depth, and he's done a number of lectures for us. Whether you're a qualified practitioner or a student of counselling, we have two different, offers. One for working professionals and one for students. The student offer that we have is called the Counselling Study Resource, and it's a paid for community with lectures and resources. And for qualified practitioners, we have what we call the CPD library, the Continuing Professional Development Library. And the relational depth lecture by Mick Cooper is in both of those libraries because it is that important. And it spans both of those. So if you are a member of any of our libraries, go and check that out. Just go in, do a search for relational depth, and go and watch Mick Cooper speak about it, because he speaks with great authority. And I certainly learned a lot for that. And if you're not a member of either of those libraries, go to counsellingtutor.com, and there's some information there if you can have a look and see if that would be a fit for you. So if we thinking about relational depth, we're thinking about the key aspects that would create that. And we're saying again that they start with us as the therapist. We're going to be warm, we're going to be personal, we're going to show ourselves with that congruence, as it were, within the relationship, being our true self. And we're going to, there's a human element, isn't there, Rory? You have to really be yourself and not playing the part of the therapist within the relationship, I guess, in a way.
Absolutely. There's no part for facades or role play in relational depth. And I think there's a number of elements that help relational depth. First is the environment. Yeah. It has to be a contained environment, or an environment that's mutually agreed to be safe and secure. My encounter with my neighbour was on the street, but it felt a safe place to become emotionally connected to someone else, and it obviously was the same for him, because he was able to share a little bit about his self. So environment is important, but also I think it's about intent. It's about the intent of where you're aiming to be in your practice. It's about saying to yourself, I'm going to focus on this person. I'm going to put all my effort into really trying to understand this person's frame of reference. I'm not going to be judgmental. I'm not going to come up with the answers or the solutions. I'm just going to let this person be. And I think that there's a philosopher called Buber who talks about the I-thou relationship. You'll hear me talk about this in the podcast a lot. And I and thou, this philosophical position of seeing the other person's humanity, seeing them as a human being of equal value and wonder in the world, is a very, very, very good starting position, Ken.
That unconditional positive regard for another human being. And again, when we speak about unconditional positive regard, and we've covered it in previous podcasts, again, in those foundational skills part of what we do, it's about us looking to ourselves, to be there unconditionally for somebody else with no judgment requires us to really have a look at ourselves of what we hold as our biases in life and our opinions and our likes and our dislikes and our that's right and this is wrong. Putting all of that aside is, and I guess this is why when we're speaking about relational depth, it is something that is most likely to come with experience. The more seasoned you are as a counselor, the more comfortable you are within the sessions, the more, unconscious competence, where you're not thinking about what I'm doing and how I'm saying it and what they're saying and how I might respond to that, where all of that just melts away and becomes almost second nature. It is more of an environment where we may see that that relational depth occurring. And I'm reading from the handout here because I'm cheating. I've got a super duper handout that Rory made that I use for my research when we're preparing for our topic. So relational depth may be hampered by the therapist kind of holding some control over the clients, trying to lead the client in a certain area, in a certain direction, in a certain way. In other words, having an agenda, holding an agenda. We got to get this client fixed. We got to get this client to that point. I really want this breakthrough for the client. Holding those kind of agendas can get in the way of that relational depth. The therapist meeting their own needs out of the process, attempting to fix the client, focusing on the theory, focusing on the skills rather than that present moment magic. And that kind of, I guess, from the handout are some of the things that we want to avoid. And if you're interested in getting the handout, it's free and it's pretty comprehensive. It's a good handout. And you'll get that by going to counsellingtutor.com because that's our website. And when you're on the website, right at the top, you'll notice there's like a menu bar. Click on the podcasts tab, go and find episode 213 right there on that page, free handout on relational depth that you can download.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it should be taught as a basis of therapy. And I remember many years ago giving a demonstration of relational depth. And I said to my students, I'm going to try it was a student. I'm going to try to help and to nourish relational depth in a small interaction I had with another student as a demonstration. And I remember at the end of it, we were very, very silent for a period of time. So relational depth isn't about specifically skills or verbal communication. We sat in silence for a number of minutes, just connected. And here's the thing, when I snapped out of the student's frame of reference and back into the room, I looked round and it was completely silent. The whole room was completely silent. And I said to the student, I said, just take a few seconds, just sit yourself down and just bring yourself back. And interestingly enough, a few years later, and I'm talking a good 6 or 7 years later, I happened to bump into the student and she said to me, I still remember that interaction, Rory. She said it was one of the most meaningful, in-depth interactions I've ever experienced. And here's the thing, we're in a car park in Warrington.
Yeah.
We're in a car park in Warrington. And as we started to talk, you could feel the process, the chime again. And for me, in that case, I had to get on with my day, and I acknowledged, where she was, and I acknowledged the experience for both of us, and then I moved on. But it would have been very easy to go back into relational depth again. But in that particular case, it wasn't the appropriate place, and it wasn't the appropriate time. Fascinating, and I think we've talked again and again, Ken, haven't we, about not the modality, the quality of the relationship being the best outcome for clients. And this just really adds, grist to the mill, as we say in the north of England. It really, really does. And I'd encourage you to look it up. If you're a student, look it up. Maybe if you're not being taught it on your courses, ask your tutor, because it really, really makes a difference in practice.